Imagine the scene in Washington. Another routine morning. Analysts settling into their offices, Pentagon officials reviewing the day's agenda, staffers flipping through classified briefs, and somewhere another thick update on the F-35 program. Cost curves, procurement schedules, pilot training updates, nothing unusual. And then someone brings up a question most people in that building never expected to hear seriously from a country as closely tied to the United States as Canada. What if Ottawa had chosen Sweden's Saab Gripen instead of the US-made F-35? Not as a joke, not as a hypothetical from an internet forum, instead as a real and alternative path that Canada explored and debated before locking in its final decision. Because here's the part that often gets lost in the headlines. Before Canada officially committed to buying 88 F-35A fighters, it spent years evaluating other jets, including the Saab Gripen, the Super Hornet, and the Eurofighter Typhoon. Canadian defense officials have openly discussed in public forums that multiple platforms were assessed. Swedish industry executives have confirmed in interviews that Saab held talks with Canadian aerospace firms. Earlier procurement documents and reporting highlighted phase structures and initial tranches. Numbers such as 16 aircraft appeared in planning stages, not as signs of hesitation, but as standard ways of breaking large purchases into manageable blocks. Those numbers still told a story, though. It was not a picture of Canada backing away, but one that showed how seriously it took the evaluation process before choosing the F-35. For a moment in time, there was a real fork in the road. And that fork matters far more than simply Canada considering another fighter jet. At its core, this is a rare glimpse of how a NATO country wrestled with questions of sovereignty, cost, Arctic strategy, and the uncomfortable idea that US defense dominance does not always automatically produce the best fit for everyone. Analysts in Washington are not simply concerned about losing sales. Many argue they are concerned about losing the narrative that American systems are always the obvious choice. To understand that, you have to look at how the United States built its role in NATO aviation. For decades, American aircraft have been the default. The F-16 became the backbone of European air forces during the Cold War. The F-15 became a symbol of American air superiority. Today, the F-35 is marketed not merely as a fighter jet, but as a kind of digital ecosystem that binds allied militaries together under US software, US logistics, and US upgrades. The Pentagon has described it in official statements as the backbone or foundation of allied air power for the next generation that is not simply marketing, it is strategy. But Sweden's Gripen was never designed to fit neatly into that system. It was built for nations that wanted something else: autonomy. The more analysts looked at the Gripen option in a Canadian context, the more it started to look like a jet that, on paper, fit Canada's geography and budget in ways the F-35 does not always match. Not necessarily better in absolute terms, but, as many experts suggest, better aligned to certain needs right now. Take operational costs. Public estimates from Saab, the Swedish government, and independent defense analysts generally place the Gripen's flight hour cost somewhere in the low thousands of dollars. Estimates for the F-35A, including figures cited by US Government Accountability Office reports and other open sources, tend to fall roughly in the mid-tens of thousands of dollars per flight hour. These are estimates and they vary depending on methodology, but the direction is clear according to these sources. Gripen is cheaper to fly. For a country such as Canada, which must patrol one of the world's largest airspaces with bases spread across harsh northern environments, affordability translates directly into operational readiness. The more a country can afford to fly its jet, the more prepared its air force is. Canada, historically, has not been a heavy spender on defense. That is not opinion. NATO spending reports consistently show Canada trailing behind many alliance partners in defense spending as a share of GDP. In that context, a fighter that costs far less to sustain is not just attractive, it is, as many analysts would argue, strategically easier to keep in the air. Then you have range. Publicly available specifications list the F-35A's combat radius at just over 1,100 kilometers. The Gripen E is often quoted around 1,500 kilometers, depending on configuration and source. That gap matters enormously once you leave the compact geography of much of Europe and look at a country that stretches nearly 5,500 kilometers from coast to coast, Canada's northern approaches, the Arctic archipelago, the long distances between airfields and recurring Russian air activity near Canadian and NORAD classified airspace all make range a key factor. Here is where it becomes even more real. In practice, Arctic operations are not theoretical mission profiles on paper. They are deeply physical, brutally demanding tasks where the environment itself is the enemy. Imagine a scenario where a Russian reconnaissance aircraft drifts close to Ellesmere Island in the dead of winter. Winds slice at -40 degrees. Visibility fluctuates. The nearest major base is hours away. An F-35 can make that flight, but it typically relies on robust infrastructure, tanker support, and runways that suit its more demanding maintenance and support requirements. A Gripen-style concept, by contrast, is built around dispersed operations. You could, at least in theory based on Swedish doctrine and public demonstrations, position fighters farther north, operating from shorter and rougher strips or widened roads cleared of snow only hours earlier, allowing a quicker response and a wider web of deployment sites. Or imagine a search and rescue emergency where a domestic aircraft goes silent in Nunavut. A platform designed for improvised basing and rapid turnaround gives Canada a type of flexibility that a more infrastructure-dependent jet struggles to match. In the Arctic, theory does not save lives, practicality does. Then there is runway flexibility more broadly. Sweden designed the Gripen with a philosophy most big manufacturers do not prioritize: the ability to take off and land on short, narrow, improvised strips such as regular roads, remote stretches of highway, and snow-cleared straightaways. This is not marketing spin. Sweden has demonstrated highway operations publicly for decades, and countries operating the Gripen use dispersed basing tactics to avoid having their jets concentrated at a small number of vulnerable, high-value air bases, according to official exercise footage and military publications. The F-35, by contrast, was not optimized for this kind of environment. It can operate in cold climates and has participated in Arctic and northern exercises, but it generally relies on specialized infrastructure, carefully maintained runways, advanced support equipment, and climate-controlled hangars. None of this is surprising. It is a stealthy, fifth-generation jet with sensitive coatings and tightly integrated systems. But the design priorities are different. The reality, as many observers point out, is that Canada's geography often rewards rugged and flexible aircraft that do not demand perfect conditions. Yet all of that still pales in comparison to the issue that really gets people in Washington thinking carefully: control over software and systems. Most people casually assume that when a country buys a fighter jet, it owns it fully. With the F-35, however, ownership is more complicated. The jet runs on software that is centrally managed. Mission data files are typically generated and updated through processes coordinated with the United States. Maintenance and logistics have been tied into systems such as ALIS and now Odin, which are overseen in cooperation with the US and prime contractors countries, cannot freely open up, modify, or replace certain elements of the aircraft without going through agreed channels. That includes aspects of upgrades, weapons integration, and diagnostics. This framework is documented in official program descriptions and parliamentary or congressional reports. To be clear, this is not a secret plot or a violation of anyone's sovereignty. Partner nations sign up to these terms contractually and do so because they want access to the capabilities the F-35 provides. However, it creates a form of operational dependency. You are, by design, deeply integrated into an American-led ecosystem. Sweden's sales pitch for Gripen sits almost at the opposite end of that spectrum. Saab emphasizes in its public marketing and government-to-government discussions that customers can maintain, upgrade, modify, and operate the jet with far fewer political strings attached. Countries such as Brazil have embraced this as part of their national doctrine, with local production and deep involvement in development. For a country such as Canada, which has long sought greater control over its own strategic decisions and has occasionally clashed with Washington over trade, tariffs, and political priorities, that idea of technological and industrial independence carries weight, at least in the theoretical debate about which path would have served Canadian interests best. Now we reach the industrial angle, which is arguably the most politically explosive part of this entire story. Before Canada selected the F-35 in 2022, Saab indicated in public statements a willingness to build Gripens in Canada. This was not a vague promise. The company held discussions with Canadian aerospace firms, including Bombardier, about potential industrial participation if their jet was chosen. The model would likely have mirrored elements of the Brazil program, where major portions of the Gripen are manufactured domestically, creating an ecosystem of high-tech jobs and know-how, according to Saab and Brazilian government releases. For Ottawa, that kind of offer is a dream scenario on paper. It would strengthen national defense, boost domestic manufacturing, modernize the aerospace sector, and reduce dependence on foreign supply chains all at once. For Washington, it is easy to see why analysts would consider that uncomfortable. A major ally flying a non-US fighter and building it at home outside the American industrial umbrella is not something the US defense ecosystem is eager to see. In the end, Canada chose the F-35, but the fact that the alternative existed and was taken seriously is exactly why this story keeps resurfacing in defense debates and think tank papers, because the fear in Washington, as some observers argue, is not that one country might pick Gripen over the F-35. The deeper concern is the potential domino effect in perception. Norway has already been outspoken in public about high sustainment costs for the F-35. Spanish defense planners, according to European press and policy analyses, remain cautious, balancing the F-35 against European fighter projects and industrial interests. Greece has real budget constraints and pays close attention to any model that reduces foreign dependency over time. Even Finland, despite ultimately selecting the F-35 after one of the most rigorous evaluations ever conducted, publicly acknowledged that Gripen's sovereignty-focused and dispersed operations philosophy was compelling. None of these countries are guaranteed Gripen customers, but if a G7 country such as Canada had gone Swedish, it would have created what some analysts describe as a psychological permission slip. Proof that diverging from American equipment is not disloyal, it is simply a sovereign choice. This is what really worries Washington, not the loss of a single contract, but what experts see as the slow erosion of a carefully built system in which US platforms are the default backbone of NATO air power. Meanwhile, Canada faces its own pressures that go far beyond industrial benefits or diplomatic signaling. The Arctic is changing rapidly. Melting ice is opening new shipping routes, Russian military and air activity in the north has been increasing for years, according to Western intelligence and open source tracking. China is expressing interest in the region as a near-Arctic actor, as stated in its own policy documents. Ottawa is being pushed slowly but surely into treating its northern approaches as a frontline theater rather than a frozen afterthought. Modern fighters in that context are not simply about air-to-air kills. They are about sovereignty patrols, rapid responses, disaster relief, and constant presence over sparsely populated territories. Any platform Canada chooses must be able to live inside that reality. Gripen-style capabilities fit that mission profile in obvious ways. The F-35 brings different strengths: stealth, sensor fusion, deep integration with US and allied systems, and a high-end warfighting package designed for contested airspace. Neither jet is universally better. The real question, as many commentators frame it, is what kind of future Canada envisions for its air power. As this debate grows, even post-election, the conversation inside Canada is shifting from which jet is technically superior to which model of dependence or independence do we want to build around. Aerospace engineers, former RCF officers, procurement experts, and defense scholars have raised versions of the same question in interviews and publications. If Canada ever had to make a different choice down the line, should it continue doubling down on a highly capable but tightly integrated US system, or should it one day push for more flexibility, more domestic control, and potentially a different cost profile? None of these voices are anti-American or anti-F-35. They are reacting to a strategic reality that many agree is changing fast. And reality is shifting not only in Ottawa, but across Europe, Sweden, and Finland now anchor NATO's northern flank. Germany is committing hundreds of billions of euros to rearm, according to its own Site and Venda announcements. France continues pushing for European strategic autonomy. The European Union talks more and more in official documents and speeches about defense sovereignty, industrial independence, and not being entirely reliant on any one country, even a close ally such as the United States. In that context, the Gripen represents more than a fighter jet. It represents a different philosophy. Smaller states retaining more control over their capabilities, even while staying inside alliances such as NATO. So where does this all lead? What does this mean in the long arc of geopolitical time? The answer becomes much clearer when you project into the future. Picture the year 2035. Two paths, at least conceptually, diverge for a country such as Canada. In one imagined future, Canada had pursued a Gripen-style model. It has a domestic aerospace program humming with jobs. Fighters are dispersed across northern strips, fully under Canadian control, upgraded with a mix of national and partnered software, and serviced mainly by Canadian technicians. Arctic patrols are frequent, relatively affordable, and flexible. The country enjoys a level of operational independence and industrial self-reliance it has not seen in decades. NATO still functions, but as a slightly more diversified alliance in which advanced platforms come from multiple sources, not just one. In the other future, the one Canada is actually on now with the F-35, its fleet fleet is advanced, stealthy, and deeply integrated with US and allied systems. It can plug effortlessly into US-led operations, NORAD missions, and NATO exercises. However, upgrades and sustainment remain tied to the broader F-35 ecosystem. Costs must be managed carefully to avoid flying less than the Air Force would like, according to budget debates and program reviews. Arctic coverage is still strong, but more dependent on large, well-equipped bases and tanker support than on dispersed, improvised strips. Canada remains interoperable, absolutely, but also more structurally dependent on US logistics and decision-making than in the alternative scenario. These are not predictions. They are thought experiments, logical extensions of different choices that were on the table when Canada was weighing its options, as many strategic studies like to explore. And that is why, in diplomatic and strategic commentary, you often hear phrases such as embarrassing or uncomfortable applied to the idea of a major ally even considering stepping outside the American defense umbrella. It is not because the United States is being humiliated in an emotional sense. It is because it challenges assumptions that have guided policy for decades. This is not a small state at the edge of the map questioning American dominance. This is Canada, a G7 nation, a NORAD partner, a country that shares one of the closest, most institutionalized defense relationships on Earth with the United States. If Canada's evaluation process showed that a non-US jet could make a compelling case, it inevitably encourages others to ask harder questions too. So where does this story go from here? In the short term, Canada is committed to the F-35 path. Budgets will continue to be debated. Arctic strategy will keep evolving. Domestic industry will keep pushing for more high-value work shares. The F-35 program will likely continue to face sustainment cost scrutiny, even as it matures and improves, according to US oversight bodies and allied reviews. Saab, for its part, will keep positioning Gripen as the flexible, sovereignty-friendly option for countries still making their choices. In the long term, the question becomes bigger than Canada and bigger than any single jet. It becomes a question about NATO's identity. Should the alliance continue relying primarily on US aircraft for its cutting-edge capabilities? Or should it consciously diversify its airpower ecosystem? Should sovereignty and national decision-making sometimes outweigh the efficiencies of everyone flying the same jet? These debates are already happening inside European ministries and think tanks, even if much of it is behind closed doors. According to policy reports and expert commentary, Canada's Gripen versus F-35 moment did not create this conversation. It simply made it impossible to ignore. Because if a country as close to Washington as Canada could even seriously weigh a different path, the message, as many observers see it, is clear. The era in which American air power dominance inside NATO was automatic is under more scrutiny. The era in which allies felt they had no alternative is over. The era in which nations inside alliances still insist on their own margin of independence is only just beginning. That is why Washington pays such close attention to these debates. That is why defense planners in Ottawa, Stockholm, and Brussels keep revisiting them, and that is why the rest of the world is quietly watching what choices countries such as Canada make next.